Hi, friends. Father Kerry Walters here, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one, another life lesson from the ancients. Sappho on erotic desire and memory. We human beings seem to be hardwired to crave intimacy with one another. We yearn for a connection with others. And that yearning almost always expresses itself as a kind of erotic desire, doesn't it? Or what we might call romantic love. We need other people to connect with us in an intimate physical way, but also in an intimate emotional way. Without it, we languish. With it, we thrive, even though we may also have to endure some pain from it. Poets have sung about the pleasure and the pain of erotic desire for generations. One of the most poignant of them, for my money at any rate, is the ancient Greek poet Sappho, Sappho of Lesbos. We don't know a great deal about her life. We figure she was probably born around 630 or 620 BC and died around 570 BC. She, of course, was from the Isle of Lesbos, which is closer to present day Turkey than it is to mainland Greece. And so it spoke a dialect that wasn't at all spoken in Athens. The Greek of Sappho's poetry is rather idiosyncratic and rare. She seems to have come from a relatively wealthy family. She had three brothers. She might have been married. She certainly seems to have had a daughter named Cleis. It's not clear what she did to make a living. She might have been the mistress of a school for girls. She might have had some kind of temple role, perhaps as a priestess of Aphrodite. It could well be the case, some people argue, that she was a high class courtesan who entertained her clients with verse and song. We just don't know. What we do know, however, is that the ancient world revered her poetry. In fact, the fragments of her poetry that have come down to us have done so largely because they were quoted by ancient authors in texts that we do still have. We have only one complete poem of Sappho's and over 100 fragments. Some of those fragments are several lined, some of them are single lines. But what comes through in all of them is an intense emotionality, an intense craving for erotic love. And that, of course, is something that all of us can hear with great deal of attention since it is so central to our own lives. Sappho seems to be arguing something like the following in the fragments of her verse. When we are younger and are aflame with erotic zeal, with erotic ardor, we tend to live in the present. All we want to do is to bask in the company here and now of the beloved. Or if we are yearning for the beloved, all we are preoccupied with here and now is the intensity of that desire. But as the years begin to pass by, the flame of erotic desire begins to diminish, and we move from a place of being in the present to a place of remembering the past. That's something that, to a certain extent, Sappho regrets and mourns, but to a certain extent, she recognizes as simply the way of all flesh. So, in reading the fragments of her poetry, what we're invited to do is to reflect upon our own lives, to realize that there are different levels of love depending upon what phase of life we are in, and that the fiery, burning presentness of erotic desire that characterizes our younger years may not at all be with us in our older years. Let me read you some snippets of her poetry to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. She says, for instance, in speaking of how erotic desire makes us present, Eros has shaken my mind like wind swooping down the mountain onto oaks. You came and I wanted you. You cooled my heart that was burning with desire. When Eros overtakes me, I'm like an oak swept hither and yon, but still in the present, still yearning. My heart is burning, and only the embrace of the lover can cool it. I forget everything else. In another one of her poems, she sings of Helen of Troy, how Helen forsook husband and children in order to sail to Troy with her newly found lover. The past didn't matter. All that mattered was the present. All that mattered was the embrace of the lover. Or in one of her most famous poems, which we have almost all of, by the way, she speaks of the presentness of staring in adoration at a comely maiden, probably at a banquet. And this maiden is seated by a man. And as Sappho stares at the maiden, probably willing her to look back in the present, she finds herself ablaze with hunger for the young girl and jealous of the man simply because he's closer to her than she, Sappho, is. And she writes, "My voice cracks, a thin flame runs under my skin. My eyes see nothing, my ears ring. A cold sweat pours down my body. I tremble all over." There's nothing that exists, nothing in the world that exists, except the sensations coursing through Sappho's body as she looks with adoration and desire at this maiden. As the years progress, however, as I said just a few moments ago, the fieriness of the erotic desire begins to cool. Before long, we can remember past loves with little, if any, emotion. One of her fragments says, "I remember, Athos, we once were lovers," said in such a matter-of-fact, non-involved way that one recognizes that the memory of Athos has become rather abstract and wooden. But it's also the case that as we age, our bodies begin to become less attractive than they once were. And so we might feel inhibited or at least modest about engaging in erotic pursuit. We may feel even ashamed of the way in which we at least fancy we look now. And as a consequence, we may avoid seeking the same kind of romance we once did. This is what Sappho says in another one of her verses. "My heart is heavy and my knees will not carry me. There is no way for a human not to grow old. I lament this constantly, but what can be done? I'm no longer as attractive as I once were. I've grown older. Romantic love surely is no longer for the likes of me." In fact, at one point, she writes in a disarmingly honest bit of poetry this: "If you are my friend, go to a younger woman's bed, for I won't endure an affair in which I'm older than the man." She simply cannot face the possibility of no longer enjoying the ardor of youth, and she certainly can't face the possibility of being a lover to a man or a woman who is still young and is able to experience that fire that she once experienced. The presentness of romantic ardor rolls over into the remembrance of erotic ardor. Experience of things present becomes a remembrance of things past. At a certain point, however, one senses in her poetry that she has come to accept this change in life. It might have been a hard-won acceptance, but it nonetheless is there. And this is what she writes, I think, that expresses that acceptance. "The sweet apple reddening on the topmost branch. The topmost apple on the tip of the branch. And the pickers forgot it. Well, no, they didn't forget. They just couldn't reach it." Or she writes, "I no longer expect to graze the sky." For her, erotic desire once was like that wonderful, exquisite, desirable apple at the very top of the tree. She had no trouble reaching up and plucking it and sinking her teeth into it. But now she can't reach it. Or there was a time when Erotic desire would lift her up to the very heavens, such that she could graze the sky itself. But those days are gone, and she can no longer graze the sky. What she can do, however, is remember the sweetness of the apple. What she can do is to remember the joy of being catapulted into the heavens on the back of erotic pleasure. And that, she seems to say, is okay. Yeah, there's a tinge of melancholy in the verses that speak this way. There's no doubt about that. But there's also a kind of celebration that at least the apple was plucked and eaten once, that at least the sky was grazed once. She goes even further in a most remarkable verse. She seems to suggest that it's far, far better to have loved and then at the end of one's life have only the memory of love than never to have loved at all, because never to have loved at all is never to have lived. Listen to what she says. When you, speaking to whomever, speaking to us perhaps, when you are dead, you'll lie forever unremembered. No one will miss you, for you've not touched the roses of the Pierian muses. Invisible even in the house of Hades, you'll wander among the dim dead, a flitting thing. If you never love, your name is writ upon the water. There is no legacy, there is no memory worth retaining of your life. Love, romantic ardor, the pleasure and the pain, the exquisiteness of romantic love and sexual intimacy is what infuses life, according to Sappho, with the joy that it ought to have. And even when the presentness of that experience is gone, the glow of its memory keeps us alive. She is a wonderful, wonderful observer of human nature. I really do urge you to get a copy of her verse and read it for yourself and exult in it. And let it speak to your own life, where you are in your stage of life and where you're likely to go. If there's a single translator that I would recommend, it's Stanley Lombardo. Friends, this has been another Holy Spirit moment and another life lesson from the ancients. They have so very, very much to teach us. Thank you so much for watching. If you are of a mind, I invite you to subscribe. Take care. I'll see you soon.